So, good morning, everyone. This is Ali as the Dean for Generation 4 Education. And after a 1 month break, July, we're back in our special day. Welcome back to school. So I'm so excited to collaborate for the first time with Carla today. Carla is in Singapore currently. And Carla, you have participants watching from Lebanon, from Kuwait, from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia, and many other countries. So we're waiting for them to join in, to put in that chat where they are watching from. If they are also watching on Facebook, we are going to be live, and then I'm going to check their question, their interaction, and then voila, Victoria watching from Thailand. So let's see if we have also someone from Singapore. Where are you based? And I would like to remind them in that chat, please put all attendees or everyone, so we can all read your messages. And then if you have any question and answer, feel free to put it in the Q&A. And Carla, it's 11:31 Dubai time. We are ready to give it a start for the next approximately 1 hour with you to learn about how do we change the teaching and learning post-COVID.
Thank you so much, Ali, and welcome to everyone in this room. I would love to see you all, but unfortunately, we're not in the same physical space. So we'll just manage with our virtual space a little bit longer. So as Ali mentioned, my name's Carla Marschall. If you're on Twitter and you'd like to have a dialogue about this, professional learning in that space, I'm at Carla Marschall. You can also use the hashtag #TeachWorldwise. So who am I? This is me. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning at United World College, Southeast Asia. You can see in that middle photo there, kind of overlooking our plaza. And I am a co-author of 2 books. So the first one is Concept-Based Inquiry and Action, which I co-authored with Rachel French, has a focus on how do we support students in developing transferable conceptual understanding filled with strategies for teachers. I'm also a writer, so this is one of the articles I wrote in the lower right for Edutopia recently. But really, I kind of say to people who ask me about my writing, writing is just a way for me to inquire. I'm really an inquirer. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm extremely excited about pedagogy and about what we can do in the classroom to really support our learners. So with that, I'm going to move on, show you the book that we're going to be talking a little bit about today and some of the content here. So this is actually coming out in September. It's a co-authored book that I wrote with Professor Elizabeth Crawford from the University of North Carolina. And it was illustrated by Chris Gadbury, who is a PYP art teacher in Hong Kong. And our foreword is from Veronica Boatz-Mazilla, who is a investigator, principal investigator at Harvard Project Zero, a wonderful contributor to this book as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can help our students to shape a just, sustainable future. We know that this is important. But first, before we do that, I'm going to add a little bit on to what Ali asked. So you wrote where you're from. I'm curious why you're here today. So you don't necessarily need to write your country again unless you want to, but what's bringing you to this workshop? Because one thing we're going to talk about today is what we mean by courageous teaching. And part of it is starting with the identities of our learners and the identities of the people that we work with. And so I'd love to see a little bit more about why you've decided to come into this room and have this conversation today.
Great. So while we were doing this introduction, and good luck for the new book, Carla. So we're so excited to have it again in our libraries. Do you know that publication date?
I think it's supposed to be September 21st,
okay.
But it might be a week later. We'll see.
Okay, so Riz, welcome from Bangladesh. We had more people joining from Qatar and different countries. So our first question for you, why you are here today? So, and we are checking for, let's say, oh, no, the answers started coming and they are very fast. So we have a counselor, and the counselor is based in Kuwait, Asma, hello, and she would like to get new skills to support her staff. Riham, she's doing, like, she's been in the online learning for 1.5 years, and now they are going to be back face to face. So she would like to know how we are going to be back to the face to face. Riz, he would like to learn some new strategy, and then Adlira, she would like to keep the student alive, engaged, lifelong learners. So she's here to learn more strategies, more ideas. We have a music teacher here, and she would like to see also how we can go back to the classroom after being for a full year online. So these are some of the ideas why people are here and why they are watching this webinar. And then the people, they would like to know more about your book. Rula, she just moved to Dubai, and she would like to know more how we can empower the students and the learners, especially during these days. And then let me wrap it up with Taghreed, who would like to learn more strategies and skills.
Yeah, so a lot of the things you just described there, coming back into a physical environment with learners who have potentially been socially isolated or experienced remote learning for an extended period of time. We've been really blessed here in Singapore. We had most of our year last year in person. We had some, I think about 4 weeks at the end of the year where we had to go remote for most of our learners. And so that is something we're going to touch upon at the very beginning of this workshop. So to get started, I'm going to share the guiding questions that we're going to be thinking about today. The first is, what learning from COVID-19 can we bring with us into this school year? A lot of us want to just get rid of it and pretend like it never happened, get on with things, but there's so much growth and learning and opportunity there that we really have to leverage as we go into this school year. How might we build agency and promote student well-being through our curriculum design? And how can we develop learners who view themselves as capable agents of change? So agency is going to be a theme that comes throughout this, this session today. So I'm going to start with one of the words which is in the title of the session, and it's the idea of being courageous. So courage actually comes from the Old French cor, which means heart. So when we're talking about courageous teaching, what we're talking about is promoting our own and our students' humanity. And we know that our students have had a variety of experiences, both because they come from diverse backgrounds, but also because of COVID. And so we want to take an asset-based approach where we really view our students' identities and experiences as something that will enhance the learning experience. So we're going to have that as kind of a thread that goes throughout our thinking today. And we're going to do that as well in our own kind of work as educators. So we're going to go a little bit faster through this part. And Ali, I'm happy to pull out some of the threads as people share in the chat. So I've got a tea image here. We've been steeped like a tea bag. It's steeped in this situation for now 1.5 years, basically the 3rd school year that we're going into with this pandemic. So we're just going to do a quick popcorn out. As a result of COVID, what impacts have you experienced personally and professionally, and what impacts did our students experience? And I recognize this question may make you feel a little bit vulnerable. You may have had extreme personal or professional loss. And so please just share what you feel comfortable with in this space, but please know it is a safe space. And the whole point here is to think about what we've experienced to be able to use it as a next step in our teaching and learning with our students. So what impacts have you experienced personally and professionally? What impacts did our students experience?
A very key message, what you're sharing here, Carla, by saying that we are in a safe space, and we would like our students to feel the same at the beginning of this academic year. So especially many countries around the world are struggling, not just with COVID, but maybe other type of problems. The fire in some countries in the Mediterranean, the situation in Lebanon. And so, yeah, the chat started now coming. And just to remind you, Riz put all panelists and attendees, or everyone. And so in this case, everyone will be able to read your messages. So we are having, we're developing more our IT skills. We're growing collaboration. We had some moment of anxiety, but at the same time we are grateful. We are having the low enrollment at the school, uncertainty for the future, but at the same time we had some positive impact. So I'm more digitally competent, more creative. We found alternative ways to face-to-face engagement. Working with KG, it was very difficult, but again, we had to just make it consistent and to do it. We explored different digital platforms, and then taking one more, I was surprised by how some students were thriving online more than in person.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of themes there around being able to develop new skills, think creatively about how we're going to reach our students, but then also the flip side of that around anxiety and uncertainty and not knowing what's going to come. And so it's really important as we move into the school year to think about what we've been carrying with us as educators. So there's one article which I will share at the end of the session in the chat to all you, which is about resilience. And it uses this metaphor of stress being like a glass of water. And it says, you know, it doesn't matter how much water you have in the glass might be very full or very empty. It's about how long you hold the glass for. So if you hold a glass of water for a minute, it's not going to bother you. It's not going to feel any strain in your arm. You hold it for an hour or 2 hours. You maybe start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. You start to hold the glass the whole day. Maybe you're numbed and you're paralyzed and you're feeling really uncomfortable holding that glass. We've been holding this glass of water for 1.5 years with our learners, and we have to find ways to be able to put it down. But we also have to recognize that having experienced this provides some opportunities to rethink our identities as educators. So thinking about our identities as educators is kind of the next piece here, because Worldwise learning comes from a place of partnership between students and teachers. So how has COVID-19 impacted how you see yourself as an educator? What's changed and what's remained the same? So I can speak for myself that I've really thought about how I'm reaching all of my learners' social and emotional needs. Am I making sure that I'm speaking to that side of them as well as to the academic side? Because I do teach one section of kind of grade 7 social studies here. So what are some of the ways that you have seen this impact on your identity as an educator? And please pop those ideas in the chat.
So while they are putting these answers in the chat, I'm going also to model it and then say and answer the question, what remained the same? I would say our passion as educator, Carla, because if we are really passionate educator, face-to-face or online, people were still able to feel it and to see it, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So educators need to develop teacher agency. This is something that maybe changed according to Riz or according to his new perspective. Our values are the same, which are inquiry, concept-driven. And so we kept connecting to these values even online and giving agency or preparing the virtual class for students to take agency. Those are things that they didn't change. I'm also looking on Facebook to check some answers from the Facebook, and so we are having people watching from India, and then regarding the impact, we're getting the answer of like the lifelong learner. So now it's a kind of a must. Like you cannot say I know everything, and lifelong learning is really very, very clear impact of COVID. So Dina, hello Dina. Dina is saying that the importance of seeing the student as a whole, their feelings, we need to listen to them, looking at them mentally, physically, spiritually, their well-being. So this was also like given much importance. Victoria, she said like what was different is the method our method or strategy for the online learning were different. We tried different things. And then Jerica is mentioning the whole idea of being flexible and the flexibility. So, and then finally, I'm going to take a final message where it says, we cannot control everything. There
Absolutely.
are many factors outside of our control. Voila.
So some of the things I'm hearing are kind of return to our values, thinking about what we hold important and making sure that we forefront those. And also then adaptability and thinking about the way in which we need to change some of the aspects of ourselves to be able to reach our learners, given this new context. So what I want to show you as a kind of next step with this is we can actually think about the way that COVID has produced these changes in ourselves as educators and our educator identities as post-traumatic growth. So grief expert and psychologist, Dr. Robert Niemeyer, he calls this kind of a form of meaning reconstruction in the wake of crisis and loss. This was a global crisis. We're still living through it. Many countries still have so many cases and so much loss. But the image I have here is of the Banksia tree, which is a plant from Australia. And I think many of you remember when there was those really horrific bushfires in 2019. And the Banksia is quite interesting because the seed pods only open under high heat. So this is a plant that actually finds a way to regenerate itself in a time of crisis. It releases those seed pods and then it produces rebirth in that ecosystem. So in the same way, we can try and think about how we can grow from this and what we can take from this in a positive way that's going to impact our learners to make them agents of change in the world. One last poll, and then we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty here, which is think about what meaningful learning was most evident in your students that isn't reflected in the curriculum. So we talked a little bit about how we changed as educators, the impacts that we felt. When our students were seeing that COVID lion in the eyes, what kind of learning did that create for them that's not really reflected in our curricular standards? Ali's going to help with kind of pushing this out to you as a poll, and then we'll see what your responses are.
So the participants, they started interacting, and I'm seeing like two, for the moment, they are getting the same percentage. I'm not going to give the answer now, and it's changing very fast. I'm sure, Carla, you're seeing this also on the screen with the percentages, or not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so I'm the only one who's able to see it. I'm giving them a few more seconds, and then so the poll is on the screen, and then all the teachers and the educators who are watching us this morning, they are answering the poll, and I'm going to give a few more seconds, and then I'm going to announce which one took the highest percentage. And here we go. So we have 31% for independence and self-regulation, 28% for care and compassion, 24% for resilience and adaptability, and then 17% for awareness and interest in the world issues.
Thank you so much, Ali. And so interesting to see that it's split quite evenly.
Yes.
That we didn't have just one that we found that students really developed the most in. And I think the point of this poll was to show that sometimes as educators, we get hung up on what we are supposed to do from our written curriculum. We have to do the math standards. We have to do the literacy standards. We have to do the science standards. But then we forget that our environment produces so much learning that's not recorded in the curriculum that's actually really important lifelong learning. And it mirrors the learning that we've had ourselves as educators and shows kind of a way or a direction that we need to head collectively as schools around the world. So one of the things that we noticed in our students was the development of global competence. And we're going to talk about this a little bit today. Global competence is the mobilization of learning, kind of knowledge, skills, understandings, and dispositions in complex or novel situations to produce action. So students really taking action on their learning by mobilizing and choosing from their learning and using it in some purposeful way. We also saw that our students were producing citizenship behaviors starting from their home. They decided when they wanted to eat. They decided when they wanted to have a break because they were remote. They decided, how they were going to do their work, if they were going to do it in a certain order, who they were going to collaborate with potentially. They're going to call their friends up and do the work together. And so the importance of citizenship, our students asking questions about the world around them, and then having this immense amount of agency in the home environment to be able to engage in their learning. And again, that was more successful for some learners than others, depending on their independence, self-regulation, as we talked about before. But this being a really important theme going forward in education, how are we going to help our students move from that local sphere of citizenship out to a global citizenship sphere? And it starts in the school. We mirror that for our students. We help them move between these different spheres of citizenship. So I want to just show one kind of piece of evidence that kind of connects to this. And this is a great report, which again, I'll share in the chat as links at the end of this, which is called Healing Community and Humanity. Two individuals, Justin Reich and Jal Mehta, interviewed 200 teachers and students about how they want to reinvent education post-COVID. And they talked about what would you want to amplify? So what should we make more of? What would you want to hospice? So what should we let die? And then, what should we create? What are new things that need to happen? And one of the themes we heard from teachers was around the importance of relationships and community. So I've got some highlighted text here that I'm going to read for you. We heard two themes with some consistency: the need to emphasize relationships and community, and the desire to build on students' newfound sense of autonomy. As one teacher wrote, I need to make so much more space for connecting with students and for students to learn about each other. I have to stop thinking about community building as one unit at the beginning that I rush through, and how community can play a much larger systemic role in my classroom. So we have this concept of agency, what they call autonomy here, kind of baked into what teachers are seeing as being part of the ideal conditions for all of our students to thrive. And the OECD definition for agency is just so lovely. And I want to share this with you because I think the language here really helps us see what this should look like in the classroom. So they describe it saying, it is about acting rather than being acted upon. It's about shaping rather than being shaped, and making responsible decisions and choices rather than accepting those determined by others. So I've got an image of a glass blower here. This is not the teacher blowing the glass. This is the student blowing the glass. They are shaping their learning. They are the one with the opportunity to be able to think about what it should look like, and they can co-construct that in the classroom. So acting rather than being acted upon, shaping rather than being shaped, making responsible decisions and choices. How do we do this practically in the classroom? So that's all well and good. How do they shape something? What does that look like? I'm going to talk about 3 simple strategies to do this. One is we're going to get real. 2 is we're going to be a turtle, or be turtles, because we're 50 of us in the room. And 3, we're going to harness the power of many. We're going to talk through these briefly. Each one of these could be like hours that we could talk about them. So it's going to be like very quick, but again, I'm happy to answer some questions at the end. And all of this kind of relates to the content of the book, which is coming out in September. So the first strategy is to get real. So if we want our learners to shape the environment in the classroom and also be able to make responsible choices and decisions, then we need to be thinking about how we use real world issues as organizers for our curriculum. We need to support immediate application of student learning. So we represent Worldwise learning using this graphic, this cycle. And you can see in the gray circle in the middle, we have local, global, and intercultural issues kind of at the center of Worldwise learning. And the reason for that is that in traditional education, we kind of partition and separate the subjects. So it's the parable of the elephant and the blind men. So the blind men come to the elephant. One person feels the trunk and says, that's a piece of bamboo. Another person feels the tail, they say, that's a rope. One person feels the side of the elephant and says, that's a wall. This is very similar to what we do in school with, this is mathematics, this is visual arts, this is music, this is PE, and we separate and pull apart the subject areas, and it has no cohesion anymore. it makes it really hard for our learners to be able to apply their learning immediately when we have kind of abstracted the learning to this way. So, of course, the disciplines are lenses that help us to read the world, and we can't get rid of disciplinary learning. It plays a really important role in helping students develop deep literacies. At the same time, we recognize that in a wicked world, so that means a world with problems that are complex, like COVID or climate change or refugee crises or wars, relying upon experience from a single domain is not only limiting, it can be disastrous. This is a lovely quote from David Epstein from Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. So let's think about this a little bit more then. We'll use the chat again. And I'd love to see more than, I mean, the people have been chatting and writing, great, super, but I'd love to see more ideas. So in the chat, think about if we had our elephant be COVID-19. It's not the elephant in the room because we've all talked about it so much, but for the sake of the argument, if our elephant was COVID-19, what learning from across the disciplines helps us to understand this issue? And write any of your ideas in the chat. It doesn't have to be long, it could be 3 words, and we'll just read out some of those ideas.
It's a beautiful exercise. We can create a unit now after this chat. So what learning from across the disciplines help us understand COVID-19? And what do you have in the ideas? Put it in the chat. I'm just looking again at Facebook if people are watching, and then they are adding their ideas. And it can be keywords, so you don't need to write full paragraphs or full sentences. So adaptation from Rula. It reminded me a blog article that I wrote, and what do we teach during a crisis? And then it's not just COVID-19, it can be any other crisis that we are facing, a pandemic or even an earthquake. And then now all the words are coming in the chat. So we have a perspective, we have a challenge, we have well-being, we have safety, we have the social skills, emotional learning, integration of science, drama, language, and art. Yes, Dina, can you be more specific? What you are going to bring from these disciplines? Relationship and health are very important. This is a kind of a central idea or big idea that we can also unpack with the students. So some people, they are mentioning the disciplines that we can use. They talked about biology, tolerance and empathy, a lot of empathy, learning about the immunity system.
Great, yes.
Yeah. Being caring,
that's a great
and
list.
Creative, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love how we kind of went through a range of different subject areas there,
Yes.
ranging from more attitudes and values, such as empathy or tolerance, ranging to kind of science with immunity, or using music to be able to understand. So I did this myself as well, and I just kind of brainstormed a few different subject areas. And of course, depending on the age you teach, I saw we had some kindergarten teachers in here. This might not be appropriate learning for your kindergartners, but it helps us to be able to see how we can pull apart the elephant and also put it back together in a holistic way. So, you know, we have, in terms of PSE and science, health and hygiene, how viruses infect people, how vaccines work, how we can connect and collaborate remotely, which was so important for our learners. In terms of social studies, we had how economies are interdependent. You know, that's why we couldn't buy toilet paper or find, you know, yeast to make our own bread. It was all out of stock. Local and global food chains, food supply chains, political responses to the virus. In mathematics, exponential growth. You know, so those curves of people getting sick, reproduction rate. So how many people I get sick if I have it. Social distancing, right? We've got the 1 meter, 2 meters. So for our younger kids. So we do have the disciplines living in every real world issue. And so these really provide us with ways to be able to make the learning connected and coherent for our students, and allow them to see the applicability right away. And so what we're doing here is we're thinking about moving across the spectrum. I know many of you are PYP teachers, so you might use the term transdisciplinary. For the purposes of today, we're going to kind of use interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary interchangeably. But this is a metaphor that really helps me with understanding what we're trying to go towards in terms of worldwise learning. So if we think about our disciplinary learning, remember those important lenses that help us develop literacies. Those are like individual fruits. So you know when you're eating the orange or the apple or the banana. As you move towards multidisciplinary learning, it's more like a fruit salad. So you might have something that's holding the disciplines together, but you still know when you're having that piece of apple or that piece of grape or that kiwi. So it's not blended yet. As we move to interdisciplinary learning, it's really about creating a smoothie. It's about the togetherness of those disciplines, creating something greater than the sum of its parts, a new whole, right? So when we talk about flavors like strawberry banana, you know, you can't say, oh, that part was the banana and that part was the strawberry. It's actually a new flavor, right? And so that's what we're moving towards in terms of bringing together the disciplines using issues kind of as organizers in the learning. And we can think about this as existing on a continuum, because I know many of you might be in different school contexts. Some of you may have more constraints in terms of what you can or cannot do. It is always possible to do an interdisciplinary lesson or experience that might take 1 hour, 2 hours, that helps students be able to make those connections to an issue that relates to the learning that they're doing in the classroom, which may be disciplinary learning. And of course, it can extend all the way to a unit, which might be 6 weeks, or an extended unit, which might be like one of our year-long units in the PYP. And these really allow us to think about, you know, it's not a this or that, like kind of I have to do all of it or none of it. We can actually choose in a kind of intentional way when we want to give access to interdisciplinary thinking, because it will help students make connections to the real world. It will help them be able to apply their learning in a meaningful way. And when actually it's going to be beneficial for them to develop disciplinary knowledge and skills, which we also know is important. So in terms of like your context, I'm wondering here what type of opportunities for interdisciplinary thinking you think would be possible. So we'll use the poll function again, and we've got this continuum of, you know, I might be doing a math unit on linear functions, and then I'm going to do one lesson where they apply linear functions to a situation in the world, a project, which might be, you know, a few lessons or a week, a unit, which is how the unit's constructed, something like the PYP units of study, where you're doing, you know, how the world works or how we express ourselves, or an extended unit being a year-long unit. Go ahead and answer that poll now.
So I launched the poll, and then the participants are answering the question, and then I'm getting interesting also feedbacks on this, and I'm really enjoying listening to all these kind of connections, and again, this whole idea and this whole message, Carla, that post-COVID we were still talking about COVID. And then you can create a very interesting unit where you're bringing all these disciplines to see the impact, to compare, to contrast, and then to learn from what happened. And we're still also in COVID, depending on where we are on this planet. So I'm going to reveal the answers. And so we got 32% for experiences and lessons, 16% for project, 28% for units, and 24% for extended units.
Yeah, and so your school context will often define how far you can go with this, but I think what's so important for teachers who may be in more traditional schools is that there's always opportunities to make connections to the real world. There's always the opportunity to take one 45-minute lesson and say, we've done this whole unit, which is a disciplinary unit. It's not connected to anything yet because maybe the state or the national curriculum requires me to do certain things, but I can still allow for students to then make those connections in that lesson and help them to be able to see how their learning transfers. And not just transfers to, you know, a test in 10 years or university when they get to the world of work, actually now. And it could be COVID, but it could also be something that's much smaller local community issue, something that the students have the ability to make change in. So that was strategy one. We can use our real world issues as organizers. We can do that very simply as lessons or experiences. It can go all the way to year-long units. Strategy two is to be a turtle.
I'm so curious to know more details about the strategy. And so we started getting, I loved strategy one. So let's explore the strategy two with Carla.
Okay. So you might already say, hey, I've been a turtle the last year and a half. I've been hiding in my house. I haven't been going out. I've been in my shell. You can see that this turtle got his neck out and he's looking around. And that's really what we're talking about here. So it's about moving slowly and intentionally through our teaching using active listening and slow looking. And we're going to use slow looking here as a strategy today. It's a strategy you can use with your learners. It's a strategy you can use in your unit planning. And so it's very versatile. And so we're going to practice being a turtle. So Sherry Tishman, who is the person who coined slow looking, she is at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she describes slow looking saying, whatever sensory form it takes, slow looking is a way of gaining knowledge about the world. It helps us discern complexities that can't be grasped quickly. And it involves a distinctive set of skills and dispositions that have a different center of gravity than those involved in other modes of learning. We're so used to doing things quickly. I don't have time. I've got to get onto this. I've this many weeks, and then I have to move on. We don't give ourselves the time to engage in slow looking to actually see the possibilities that are around us. And so I'm going to tell a little story about this. I'm going to use one of the practices that we have in our book and describe this. So during the circuit break, well, what was called circuit breaker here was our lockdown, our hard lockdown in kind of April, May 2020. I had a 5-year-old at the time, and we had to get out of the house. We just couldn't stay in the house all day long. It would have just been impossible. So what we did is we went to a local garden, and we actually found that it was a garden with butterflies and caterpillars. It was a pollinator garden. And so we actually engaged in this practice called setting a schedule. We went every day, but we went at different times of the day. Sometimes it was the morning when I didn't have to teach or I didn't have meetings. Sometimes it was the afternoon. And because we did repeated visits, we actually got to see the way that this pollinator garden lived over time. So we got to see that the butterflies hid before a thunderstorm. Like you just couldn't find them. Where did they go? Or we got to see the caterpillars go into their chrysalises. We got to see kind of relationships between lizards and caterpillars and how there were predator-prey relationships. These are things that if we went one time, we wouldn't have seen. So slow looking actually enabled us to develop that understanding of the interconnectedness and the relationships between animals in this small habitat, and develop kind of eco-literacy love for these animals and appreciation as they grew and developed. So there are many strategies for slow looking. This is just from the book that we have a few that we describe, and we also talk about how educators can use this. We're going to try one today for 2 minutes. I know that's not very slow, but because we're on a schedule, we can't spend too long on this, but I do recommend a longer slow looking. We're going to do something called creating inventories today, so you can kind of practically feel what this is like. And this is when we list and record every item of a specific kind or those found in a particular location. So what we're going to do is, whatever space you're in, if you're in your living room, if you're at school, if you're in an office, wherever that might be, you're going to think about what are all of the examples of pattern that you can find in your space. And you're going to take 2 minutes to record either on paper or digitally to do that. Okay. So I've got my phone here. I'm going to put my timer on so that we know when 2 minutes is up, and enjoy. Okay. So 2 minutes, look for any examples of pattern you can find.
And Dina, she just mentioned in the chat, turtle quality and not the quantity.
It's been 1 minute, so about 1 more minute. Okay, so that was about 2 minutes. I know you could probably look longer, but it gives you a taste, right? It's a slow looking taster, not really slow looking. So I did this myself. I spent 2 minutes in my office at school. And in 2 minutes, I found this many patterns. And I found so many examples of patterns. I found repeating patterns. I found symmetry. I found enlargement. I found rotations. And it was just through looking at my environment, right? And I think the idea here is that we go through life and we just kind of go through the motions. And when we don't stop and develop awareness of our kind of surroundings, we miss those opportunities. I'm wondering, what were some of the patterns that you found? What did you find? I noticed, like, you could have said my jacket. My jacket actually is an Indian sari.
It has two different patterns.
Yes, it's a recycled Indian sari, and it has that. My mask, which I'll wear when I leave here, has kind of a Malay pattern on it. I've got my notebook here, which has paper on it. What were some of the things that you found in 2 minutes?
So we have a pillowcase, a carpet, organic patterns, the wooden, the lines and the tape measure, the clock has a pattern. So I have here like some flowers also next to me, the table, so the tiles, yes, the chair, the grid in the ceiling, the towel.
Yeah, wonderful. Everything comes in twos. Interesting. Yeah. Lovely. A chessboard, that's a great one. So why did I ask you to do this? What does this have to do with agency and global competence? We just looked around for 2 minutes. There is a reason why I asked you to do this. And so we're going to talk about this briefly before I move on to strategy number 3. And basically what I asked you to do is a way for us to start unit planning by actually taking stock of our community, by actually thinking about what are the possibilities that lie here. We've been in a situation, many of us are going back to face-to-face school, which we haven't been doing for a while. And so it's about thinking about where are the opportunities for student engagement and action. Global competence doesn't have to be developed through thinking about something halfway around the world. Global competence develops through active, authentic engagement with the world around you. And that starts from the classroom. It starts from your school environment. So you can do slow looking with your colleagues in your team or by yourself before you start a unit and ask yourself the question, what are the possibilities here given the concepts or the guiding questions that I want my students to be able to engage with in this unit? So this is really a very easy strategy. It can also be used by students if you want them to tune in to a unit. Even just with this, you could go on a number walk or a pattern walk around your school to look for that. So really slow looking is about trying to be aware and really mindful about the way that we integrate the outside world, bring it into the classroom and kind of break down those school walls. Okay, so strategy number 3. I'm not going to speak too long about this. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, so I just want to do a reminder. We still have around 15 minutes. So for the strategy, wrapping up, and maybe a Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to go a little bit quicker through this one.
Yeah.
So strategy 3, harness the power of many, create safe and inclusive democratic classrooms. And so you might hear that, like democratic classrooms. It doesn't mean that it's a political space. It doesn't mean you're talking about political parties. It doesn't mean that the kids run the show and the teacher doesn't do anything. It's about sharing power with students. It's about developing those values for participation, decision-making, and voice. We heard that in the description for agency, that students need to feel like they have opportunities for responsible decision-making. If we never share the power in our classrooms, it's really hard for them to do that. So again, moving from that local citizen out to global citizen, it starts in the classroom. If we create opportunities for our learners to co-construct and have opportunities for decision-making in that small space, they'll be able to go out into their communities and the wider world. So what is the democratic classroom? There's a lot of language here. I'm just going to give some keywords, okay? So it's about high trust relationships between teachers and students, modeling those values, shared power, making sure we have student voice and student agency, respecting what students bring to us as valid contributions, and finding ways for those diverse perspectives to be shared. Thinking about difficult issues and making sure we have ways for students to be able to speak about them, whether it be COVID, climate change, anti-racism, etc. Thinking about use of dialogue and group decision-making processes and developing the whole self, right? We're developing not just the brain of our heads, the brain of our students, but the brain, the heart, and the hands, all three at the same time. So what does this look like? I'll give one example. I'll tell you where you can find more, and then we'll have a quick Q&A. So one of the things we do in Worldwise Learning is we think about how we can build on students' strengths, passions, and concerns to find meaningful learning contexts. And so one of the things we do is we can co-plan with our learners. And so I'm going to give an example of what this looks like. In my own grade 7 class, we had a unit on resource extraction and use. The benchmarks, like in terms of what they needed to know and understand, were very open. It didn't say you need to learn about gold or aluminum or crude oil or soil as resources. So it was wide open. So I thought, why don't I engage in co-planning with my learners and see what are they actually interested in learning about? The conceptual understandings will be the same, but the content shifts and becomes co-owned by the students. So they engaged in some empathy mapping with me, where they had to think about, what do they think about this issue? What do they feel about it and why? They had a conversation with their peers, and they talked about what they already knew, and they wrote some connections between their peers' ideas and theirs. And then the last thing, the do, they had to think about, if we study this issue, what should we do and why? Why would it be compelling learning for you? And again, these are 7th graders. So for those of you teaching kindergarten, this may look a little bit different. But my students engaged in then elevator pitches. So my groups of 5, each group created an elevator pitch. They had to pitch it to the classroom, why they thought that would be meaningful learning. Then we had a survey where they could choose what their first and second choices were. And this helped us to be able to define the scope of our case studies. Again, we still use the normal curriculum in terms of our conceptual understandings. That didn't change, but I co-constructed the actual content of the unit with my learners. And then they were able to do some of that respectful decision-making with their peers. What happens if you don't think that someone else's idea is a good idea? How do you say, you know what, I actually prefer this other thing? So that's one of the ways that we can engage in democratic classrooms. We can also do things like co-constructed class charters, which is different than classroom rules or classroom expectations, because we build it from the children's rights. We build it from the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And so students actually think about what rights they need to have in the classroom to be successful learners, and then what their responsibilities then are. So it's about rights and responsibilities. Often when we have expectations or rules, it's just the responsibilities. But in this way, we actually highlight, look, you have these rights and you have the ability to exercise them, which is, again, making them the agents in the classroom, and hopefully having that responsibility kind of attached to the fact that they understand other people need to have their rights met as well. If you want to learn about this strategy, I do have it in this article, and I can put this in the chat. So in this article, The Power of a Democratic Classroom, there are a number of strategies that you can use right at the beginning of the school year, such as the co-constructed class charter, but other things as well in terms of classroom setup, so that we can think about the way in which we're modeling shared power relationships between students and teachers. And in this way, then supporting our student agency, and also then this idea of citizenship coming from the classroom. Okay, I'm going to skip this in the chat. I'm going to go straight to our guiding questions. So these were the three things we talked about in this session. We talked about our learning from COVID-19. We spoke a little bit about how we can build agency and promote student well-being through curriculum design that focuses on real-world issues, interdisciplinary approaches, and co-constructed approaches with our learners. And through that, developing our learners as agents of change. I'm going to leave you with this one quote before we open up for questions. And this is from Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who is the second kind of official African-American Zen Reverend. And she was speaking in a podcast I was listening to recently, and she was talking about racial identity. But I thought this was such a wonderful quote to think about teacher identity as well. She said, "You're not an it or a that, you're an arising." And I thought, how wonderful would it be if we could all come into this school year and not be fixated on, I'm this kind of teacher or I am this kind of teacher, but actually say, I'm arising because I am looking at what my students need. I'm adjusting to the context. I'm going to try to be as resilient as possible in this period of flux and change. And so kind of an invitation to all of us as we begin this school year is to think about the ways in which we can let some of those things go and be open to the change that our learners are going to bring with them into the classroom this year. Okay, and with that, thank you very much. That was from me, and I'm very happy to take questions. Again, if you want to connect to me, I'm at Carla Marschall on Twitter. You can use that hashtag, and there's my school email if you want to reach me about that either. Yeah.
So this was very inspiring, Carla. And are you back to school or not yet for this academic year?
We start on Monday with our students, yeah.
And so what is the first thing that you are going to do on Monday with the students?
I will see my students on Tuesday, not on Monday. And we will start with some activities to think about their names. Like, what's the meaning of their name? Where did it come from? Why is it important to them? How does it reflect who they are? So that they can get to know each other kind of through a culturally reflective lens. And then we're going to do the co-constructed class charter later in the week.
Okay, I usually do the story behind our name, and then we share stories, and then we say if we like our name or we don't like our name. In the chat, many people, they are sending the thank you. I'm not sure if we have a question, and we still have more comments here coming. I'm going to now share my screen and let the participants know that we still have plenty of sessions today. I just shared with them in the chat your article, so you have access to the article. And then this is our YouTube channel where the recording will be published. And as you can see, our Arabic session is already here. So Hiba, also she's watching now with us. Feel free to look at the link. And then if you speak Arabic, you can check this Arabic session. Now we will have a break. So I have a 1 hour approximately break. And then after the break, we will be back to school and we will be talking about the virtual class, because as we know, many countries, they are still working online. So Paul in Arabic will be sharing with us how to prepare for the virtual classroom, especially now we gained a lot of experience. All our early years educator, we have a session for them back to school from an early years educator perspective. And then I'm so excited for this session. We're going to look at Feng Shui in our classroom. What colors to put, how to put your desks, how to create like different corners in the classroom. And then finally, we're going to talk about the culture of curiosity and then how to create this culture from day one. So looking again at the messages in the chat, we're getting a lot of thank you. And I would like to thank Carla again. And I think we didn't feel the time. We've been here online for 1 hour. It was great collaborating with everyone, all the people who watched on Facebook and the people who joined us on Zoom. Thank you very much. Pause or break, and then I will see you in the afternoon session. Thank you again, Carla.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon or evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.